Good morning and welcome to Birding Basics. Today we're going to be looking at the shrike. And if you've never heard about these birds before, you've never seen them, and you're wondering how something that, well, looks like this earned the moniker butcher bird, that's fair. Totally reasonable question to ask. Because even on this show, we've talked about a lot of birds that have, plenty fearsome talons, feeding habits, and beaks that you would think that maybe they'd be a little bit more suitable for a name that's quite as threatening as butcherbird is. But today we are going to be looking at the shrike and figuring out what makes this songbird quite as alarming as its name implies. So we're going to be talking about what the behaviors these birds in particular have that earned them the moniker butcherbird, that in fact made their entire family name Lanidae, which translates to butcher, and how you can actually go about finding them in the field, because they are very cool birds. They are worth taking the time to search out and find, add to your list, but they can be a little bit tricky. So we're gonna parse out some IDs tools to help you out for that. So here in California, we've got two species. We're really only going to be focusing on one of them today. The first being the logger-headed shrike. This is our most common. Their population is in steep decline though, so they are a species that we're looking at for conservation purposes. Things like habitat loss, etc., are affecting these birds. But they're not the only ones, although it is worth mentioning that they are found year-round in the majority of the lower 48. So whether you're in California or you're elsewhere, these are probably going to be the shrikes you're looking for or finding. But we also have the northern shrike, which you may know looks very similar. It's a little bit paler. It's actually a bit bigger than the logger-headed shrike, but unless you're in Canada, it's not super likely that you're going to be seeing them. They do come south for the wintertime to get away from the harsher weather. But here in California, we really only get them at the Oregon border, way up north. So we're not going to be spending time figuring out how to ID them, because they're going to be incidental to your birding experience unless you're going after them specifically or you're in the area in the wintertime. So the loggerhead shrike is our buddy for today. So with the players defined on our field, let's talk about how they actually got this name and what kind of defines a shrike. So I did mention they're songbirds, and the more accurate term to use would be passerine. So if you're looking at your field guide, the passerines are pretty much the back half of the birds in your field guide. You'll notice that they're fairly small. Many of our songbirds. They've got many of them have fairly complex vocal cords, which allow them to have really interesting songs. But they're not actually defined by that, but rather their feet. Passerine refers to the feet of the birds. And the passerine foot structure, which kind of defines them as a group, features 3 toes in front and then 1 in the back. And while we've got many birds that exhibit that basic foot layout, whether it's the ducks or the coots or hawks and owls, the passerine foot structure has a really unique structure of muscles and tendons that basically lock into place as soon as they start perching. And what this means is it's not taking any active muscular effort on the part of the bird in order to keep its perch, which is super, super handy if you want to actually sleep in a tree on a branch, on a twig at night. It doesn't take you any additional effort to hold on. You're just chilling, which is great, super handy. Our shrikes do perch quite frequently, but it's not the most helpful thing for a carnivorous bird. And please note, I am saying that the shrikes are carnivorous. That means that they're not going to only be eating insects. They will, of course, birds are opportunistic. They're not going to pass up an easy meal. Certainly our shrikes are preying upon things like crickets, butterflies, other insect life. But they're also going to be feeding on things like lizards, small rodents, even small songbirds, so things like the goldfinches, the wrens. Fair game for our shrike buddies. So how do they actually manage to take down prey like that? So here's another view of our shrike, and you can actually see it perching on the wire. So our shrikes, when they're hunting, like to pounce from above. They're taking a page out of the playbook of our falcons. They hunt in a very similar manner. It's not quite as dramatic with the high-speed dives, but it's a very similar strategy. So they're going to come from above, drop down, or pounce onto their prey, either from a perch, that could be a tall bush on top of a fence or a power line. They could be hovering from above and drop down onto it. And then once it's been borne to the ground with their feet, they will incapacitate it with a blow to the neck. And this is what gets us to a very cool structure that these guys actually share with birds like our peregrine falcon, like our hawks, like our eagles. And it's called the tomial tooth. Now, worth noting, birds do not have teeth. That is a very important thing to be aware of. Our birds don't have teeth, no matter what weird structures you've seen in pictures of gooses' mouths. There are no teeth present. But the tomial tooth is a notch that you may be able to make out just behind the hook of this shrike's bill. And what it does is it allows just enough serration that they're able to actually cut through things. In the case of our falcons and our shrikes, they're cutting through the spinal cord. So that pretty much ends that struggle there. They have incapacitated the prey. It's not going anywhere. They can feed on it at their leisure. But that behavior is not what earns them the moniker butcherbird. That actually is stemming from a very particular behavior that these guys have that's called a larder. They're not the only birds that have larders. They're not the only animals that have larders. When we're defining a larder, it's just a place and a tendency for animals to stash away food for later times. You see it with acorn woodpeckers. They're especially notable for that. The larder trees are always something you're looking for if you're looking for those birds. But because of the types of food our shrikes are feeding on, as well as how they store it, that's what earned them this kind of gory reputation. Now, we're staying nice and clean and PG here. So this is a lovely illustration of a European shrike's larder. You can see that one, it's holding a vole in its beak, but it's also got another one skewered on the branch, and there's actually a great tit that is also skewered. So plenty of evidence of impalings and food storage with these guys. You're starting to get the feel for why they get called butcherbirds. So that's a little alarming, right? That's not behavior we expect from our songbirds. If they were any larger than a robin, it would be far more alarming. And I do realize that not everybody has a firm grasp on what's the size of a robin. So I don't have a shrike to show you, but I do have a robin specimen, so you can get somewhat of an impression of how the scale of this bird actually relates to a human. So this is an American robin. As you can see, it fits in my hand pretty well. It is always worth noting with specimens, because they're totally still and it's not a natural position, you don't get quite the same size that our living birds will have. You're not going to have quite that field accurate impression, but you know, a bird that would fit in an adult's hand fairly easily, and I do have small hands, so that's your frame of reference, is our American robin specimen. But the larders are not just, you know, for Halloween decorating. They're not just for storing food, although they're really great at that. And I always want to point out that when you're a predator, you are not guaranteed a meal every day. So the larders are the shrike's way of, you know, planning for that rainy day where they just can't catch anything. They'll still have a food source. And it's actually something that's really cool is they actually use this to feed on noxious prey. So certain amphibians, certain insects that have their own natural toxins as a means of protecting themselves from predation. What the shrikes will do is they'll actually leave them for a couple of days, up to 3 or so, and that's enough time that those biological toxins kind of dissipate enough that the shrike is able to feed on this prey without having any deleterious effects or poisoning themselves, essentially. So here's another shrike. It's actually adding onto its larder rather than a thorny bush. It's actually using barbed wire. So that's cool and something worth noting. They will use barbed wire for their larders as well. So you don't need to just look for the thorny plants. If you're trying to find a larder, you can also pay attention to where there's barbed wire. Now our butcher birds are shrikes. They've got their larder, and it's great for food storage, but they also use it for a secondary purpose. Larders, it's been found, actually play a role in attracting a mate. So the males will have their larders, and it's breeding season, and the females are going around to each territory. Now, shrikes are territorial birds. This comes into play a lot when you have predators, because there's a limited amount of prey available in any space. So you don't want anyone who's going to encroach upon that and take food away from you. But the females will visit and they'll explore different territories and they'll take a look at the larders of the male shrikes. And if it's a good larder, if it is filled with delicious goldfinches and field mice and crickets, one, it tells her that he can hunt, so he's able to provide. He's a fit male, worthy of, you know, having eggs with. And it also shows her that the territory that he controls has plenty of food, which is going to be really important for her because she's going to have to be feeding babies. This is a concern for her. So she needs to make sure that one, you know, he's got a job, he can provide, and two, it's actually a good neighborhood. So that's our purposes of our larders. They're not going to be winning any HGTV decorating competitions unless we're like in Halloween, but that's the reason for it. That's how they earned that name. It's worth noting that this hunting behavior is complex. There's a lot of moving parts. It's something that they have to practice. So fledgling shrikes have actually been observed practicing their hunting. And they do this with inanimate objects. So things like leaves, sticks, rocks, they'll pounce on them. They'll try and jab at them with their beaks. They'll actually chase their parents around in some pretty cool aerial displays, which is kind of adorable. If you dial it back what they're actually practicing for. It's cute. Now, this does bring me to where you're going to find your shrikes. Our loggerhead shrikes like open areas. You do want stands of bushes, short trees, spread around because they are perching birds, and they do like to have that vantage point from which to hunt, but they don't do well in forests. So the occasional open forest with lots of large clearings, that may work for the shrikes, but open territory and grassland is going to be a better option habitat-wise. When you're in those areas, for us in Santa Clara County, you're looking South County towards Coyote Valley rather than close up against the bay. Then you're going to be looking for any plants that you know may have thorns. So this is one of those instances where I'm just like, as a birder, you should be familiar with at least a couple of plants and their features. But also, you know, we saw the shrikes on barbed wire. They do like barbed wire, so check it out if there's any barbed wire fences in the area too. Pay attention to the fence lines, the tops of bushes, and especially if you're seeing any small birds that are hovering. Now, if you're in the Coyote Valley area and you're keeping an eye out for shrikes, you're also going to be in the area for kestrels. Kestrels are small falcons, so they have a lot of the very similar behaviors when hunting as our shrikes are going to exhibit. They like a perch so that they can keep an eye out for any movement on the ground that may be interesting, i.e. food. But they also like to hover. So if you see a small bird that's hovering, and if it looks too small to be even a kestrel, which is a small bird to start out with, it's probably a shrike. Now, with that said, I do need to point out that we do have a kind of copycat in the area, and it's not a strict copycat, but they're very similar looking birds when they're in flight. So this is the northern mockingbird on the bottom. Both the shrikes and the northern mockingbirds, when they fly, have flashes of white that are going to draw your eye. So you should be paying attention to where exactly those bits of white are in the tails and the wings, as well as the body shape as well. So the northern mockingbird has a really long, straight tail, whereas the shrikes is going to fan out more. While both of these birds do have white on the outer edges of their tail feathers, you can see with the shrike, it's not just a whole feather that is white. It actually edges in and angles in on a fan-shaped tail, which is not the same length as its body. So, you know, it's hard to spot in flight, but those proportions are a little bit more helpful than trying to catch sight of individual feathers on the bird. Also, those white wing patches on the northern mockingbird, they're significantly larger than they are on our shrikes. So it's a minor thing, but it can hopefully help draw you back from the immediate idea that maybe it's a shrike, because it might be a mockingbird. That being said, mockingbirds are super vocal, and the call of a shrike isn't one that the mockingbirds are going to be mimicking very often. So that was the shrike call. Also, you know, if it's sitting still, there's a very particular posture that northern mockingbirds have because of that really long tail. Shrikes tend to sit more upright. And of course, if you can get a good look at the head itself, that'll tell you right off the bat if you're looking at a shrike or a mockingbird. Shrikes have far heavier beaks because they, you know, have to bite into the necks of their prey, whereas mockingbirds are feeding on things like fruit, as well as, you know, that really distinctive black mask that our shrikes are wearing. The mockingbird does not have that. So, with that, I'm going to leave you guys with the rest of your day. Have a wonderful remainder of your week, and I will see you all next week.